I'm going to talk a little bit today about something I'm embarrassed about on behalf of the federal government. But first, before I explain to you why I'm embarrassed on behalf of my government, I need to give you a little background, Mr. President. Did you ever stop and think how much we pay in taxes in this country? You know, we got city taxes, we've got county taxes. In Louisiana, we call our counties parishes, so we have parish taxes. We got state taxes. We've got fees at all those levels. Sometimes politicians will try to call a hand in your pocket a fee as opposed to a tax, like you're going to be dumb enough to think that makes a difference. It's still money out of your pocket. And then we got federal taxes. I mean, government taxes the food we eat, the clothes we buy, the houses we live in, the cars we drive. Government taxes you when we work, when we play. If you want to go fishing, you got to pay a tax. If you want to go hunting, you got to pay a tax. Government even taxes us when we die. Let me just talk about the federal taxes just for a second. Now, this is just a fraction of the money that people pay, but at the federal level, our main tax is income tax, corporate income tax, personal income tax. You know how much we pay every year, the American people, in corporate and personal income taxes? I'm going to show you. I'm going to write it out because it's impressive. See all those zeros? It's 12 zeros. $2 trillion every year. You know how much $2 trillion is? That's $2,000 billion. You know how much a billion is? If I started counting right now to a billion, you know when I'd finish? It would take me 32 years. I'd finish in 2051. I wouldn't make it. I'll be dead by then. I'll tell you how big a billion is. A billion seconds ago, it was 1986. Ronald Reagan was president. That's how big a billion is. A billion hours ago, the Romans were conquering Mesopotamia. A billion minutes ago. A billion hours ago, Neanderthals roamed the earth. That's 1 billion. The American people pay $2,000 billion in taxes every year. Federal, not state, not local, federal, corporate, and personal income taxes. Now look, we know that as a result of the social contract we have made among ourselves, that we're better off living and working together, pooling our money so we can hire cops and build roads and educate our children. We know that's the price to pay in a civilized society, but it's still a lot of money. Now, I don't know about you, but I get mad when some people cheat, when all people that I know of cheat on their taxes. Because that means that law-abiding citizens have to pay more to make up for those that cheat. You know what else makes me mad? What else makes me mad is when the federal entity to which we pay these taxes has money of ours and they don't return it. I'm not talking about tax refunds. I'm talking about something else. And that's going to be the subject of my talk for a few minutes today. Now, look, the federal government, the Internal Revenue Service, which is housed, as you know, Mr. President, in the Department of the Treasury, they're very aggressive. Oh, Lord, you better pay your taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, they're on you, like a hobo on a ham sandwich. They'll chase you like a hound from Hades. You better pay them in the right amount. You better pay them on time. And most Americans, we don't like it, but we're okay with that because, we know we've got to run government. We've got to defend our country. We've got to educate our kids. But what happens, Mr. President, when the Department of Treasury, which houses the Internal Revenue Service, owes money to the American people and refuses to give it back? And that's what embarrasses me. And that's what makes me angry. Right now, our United States Department of Treasury is holding $26 billion. And you remember I told you, Mr. President, how big a billion is, that it owes to the American people in unclaimed, matured savings bonds. You know what a savings bond is. That's a loan by an American citizen to our government. We funded World War II in part through savings bonds. This is how a savings bond works. It's real simple. Let's suppose I go buy a $100 savings bond. I give $100 to the U.S. Department of Treasury, which collects this $2 trillion through IRS, but I give $100 to the Department of Treasury. It's a loan. Treasury takes that $100 and promises to give me, in say 20 years, $200 back. I don't get annual interest payments. There's some exceptions to that, but and in the old days I'd get a paper bond. Today it's all done electronically, but I loan the federal government $100. I wait 20 years, interest accrues. I don't get the checks, and in 2 years I go down with my savings bond, and I say, okay, I want my $200. But sometimes people forget. They'll put those bonds in a safe deposit box, or today we don't use paper bonds, we do it electronically. People will forget. Sometimes in the old days, when we used paper bonds, they would lose those bonds. A lot of times, grandparents would give, as a birthday present, a bond to their grandchildren. They'd say, give them a $100 bond. And they'd say, son or grandson or granddaughter, hold on to this bond, and in 20 years you'll have $200. And of course, sometimes the young people would lose them. But they're not really completely lost. The bond might be lost, the physical bond, in the days when we used paper bonds. And the people who loan the money to the federal government might have forgotten about the bonds. But you know who knows about the bonds? The United States Department of Treasury. Because they got the names and the addresses. And right now they got the names and they got the addresses and they got the money. $26 billion that they're holding that belongs to the American people. And they won't give it back. I used to be a state treasurer in Louisiana. I and some of my colleagues sued the Department of Treasury, the Federal Department of Treasury. You know why we sued them? Because as state treasurers, we had programs called unclaimed property programs. You might have heard about them, where we would return money to people in our states that we would take in from businesses who owed people money but couldn't find the people. Let's suppose you you go rent an apartment. You put down a utility deposit back in your home state. And you move and you don't get your utility deposit back. You forget about it. The utility can't keep that deposit. They're supposed to look for you, but they can't find it. They can't keep that money. It doesn't belong to them. It's a deposit. They got to turn it over to the state treasurer. And the state treasurers of every state work very hard to contact the people and to give them back their utility deposit. And every day, state treasurers return utility deposits, apartment deposits, uncashed payroll checks, lost stocks, lost bonds. They'll turn tax refunds. Every state treasurer is very active. They have the infrastructure set up. They have websites. They have computers. They return this money every day to people. Because when a business has your money and can't find you, they can't keep it. They got to turn it over to the state treasurer. So the treasurer sued the U.S. Department of Treasury and said, we've got these unclaimed property programs. Give us the names and addresses of these people to whom the Treasury Department owes $26 billion, and we'll get it back to people. And you know what the Department of Treasury said? Nothing. Not a thing. Said, just ignore the treasurers. And then when we finally got their attention, they said, no, we're not giving it back. We're keeping the money. Well, the treasurer sued them. And we're still in court. And not only is the United States Department of Treasury not giving the money back, they've gone and hired lawyers, and they're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to try to keep this money from the American people. And remember, the U.S. Department of Treasury, they have the names and they have the addresses. They may be old addresses, but all they would have to do would be to give the names and the old addresses to the state treasurers in every state. For example, in my state, Louisiana, and we've asked Treasury to do this, the U.S. Treasury Department would just give all the names of all the people in Louisiana to whom this money is owed through savings bonds and give them the addresses, and the treasurer in my state will track these people down and give them their money back. But the U.S. Department of Treasury won't do it. They're fighting us in court. You know why they won't do it? Greed. They figure people they'll never go claim their money, so we're just going to keep it. You can't do that if you're a business. If you're a business in America and you have somebody's money, you got to go look for them. It's a law in every state. And if you can't find them, you got to turn the money over to the state treasurer, and the state treasurer gives it back. But not the federal government, not the Department of Treasury. We're talking real money here. Let me give you an example. I see my good friend Senator Cornyn over here. He works hard for the people of Texas. They love him. I just came back from San Antonio. They love Senator Cornyn. You know how much the U.S. Department of Treasury owes Senator Cornyn's people? Just in Texas, $2.1 billion. And this money isn't lost. The Department of Treasury has it. And they got the names and they got the addresses. Now, as we went along in our lawsuit, and the lawsuit's still pending, it's not mine anymore. I'm no longer state treasurer. One of the statements that the Department of Treasury filed in court, I almost laughed. If I hadn't been in court, I would have laughed. They said that, yeah, we got the names and we got the addresses, but it would cost $128 million to organize the records. That was one of the excuses they gave to the judge. Give me a break. If you believe that, you will never own your own home. Now, if you and I lie to the government, we can go to jail. But if government lies to us, oh, it'll take $128 million to organize the records. That's called politics. Oklahoma, next door to Texas, $312 million. Michigan, the U.S. Department of Treasury is holding $773 million in fully redeemed, they're not paying interest anymore, but unclaimed savings bonds to the people of Michigan. You think some of those folks in Michigan could use that money right now? Maybe to save for retirement, maybe to educate their children. Idaho. Idaho's not very big. Now, Idaho punches above its weight. It's a great state. $128 million. Tennessee, $480 million. Wyoming, $45 million. New York, $1.5 billion. I'm just beside myself. You wonder why people hate government? Here it is. We have to pay our taxes in the right amount and on time. If we don't do it, they come and take our firstborn. And if we're late, they fine us. This is the IRS under the Department of Treasury. But here they have $26 billion. And they got the names, and they got the addresses, and they won't give it back. And it's an embarrassment. It's a disgrace. They should hide their heads in a bag. Now, I've got a bill, and I'm hoping my colleagues will support it. It's called the Unclaimed Savings Bond Act of 2019, S-2417. It's a real simple bill. It would just tell the U.S. Department of Treasury to do its job. It doesn't own this money. Doesn't own this money. It's not theirs. They need to give it back. And every state, they don't have to spend a lot of time on it. All they got to do is give the names and the addresses to every state treasurer. I'll give them the cell numbers if they want it. Just give the names and the addresses to the state treasurers. I'd like them to get our senators involved. In Florida, where our presiding president is from, and Senator Rubio, I'd like them to have the names. Maybe they could go out. We used to do this when we did unclaimed property in Louisiana. You go advertise in the paper or on the radio or in television or on the internet and say, I'm going to be out at the so-and-so mall this Saturday from 10 to 12 with my computers and my team's computers. Come on out, we'll check your name and see if you have unredeemed savings bonds. And people come out and you'd be surprised. They find their name and you say, okay, let me get your current address and we'll get you a check in 2 weeks. And people go, gosh, the last time government gave me any money was never. But they feel a little bit better about their government. This bill will work. I can't imagine who would oppose this bill except my friends at the Department of Treasury. And they don't have a good reason to oppose it. They just want to keep the money. I'm going to be talking about this a lot. Because the money is important. People worked hard for this. But I'll tell you what's more important, Mr. President, the principle. We have to pay our taxes in the right amount and on time. When government has our money, it ought to give it back to us in the right amount and on time. Thank you for your attention and your time, Mr. President. I suggest the absence of a quorum. I yield to Senator Cornyn, who has over $2 billion in uncashed savings bonds in his state, thanks to our Department of Treasury.